Hello, Global Theater. 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and pleasure to be here with Jerry Grillo. Is that the right way to pronounce it?
That's it.
Where are you
Thank
calling in from, Jerry?
I'm calling in from Sawtee, Nakuchi, Georgia.
How cool is that? First question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Well, speaking for myself, the best thing is probably love. Love, kindness is part of that. You know, it's all wrapped up into sort of the same package, if you will.
That's good. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Hmm. That's a good question. Probably, it's interesting. Probably the best way and favorite way is reading because I tend to take my time and pore over it, and that could be reading something printed or on a screen because so much of my time is spent doing that. I think that's probably the best way. It's funny because I know we're in a video age, and I sure love a good TV show or movie. I really do, but and that might be the most fun way to gather information. But I think the way that my favorite way, preferred way, is probably through reading.
Good. Now, did you become a reader because your parents read as an example? They told you to read, or on your own?
That's a great question. Actually, it's a little bit of all three.
Wow.
It really is. If I'm being honest, it was it was never like my parents were never very heavy-handed about education and stuff. I mean, they had 5 kids, so they tried to keep things real. They just want but they did things like so I remember this was in the late 60s, signing us up for books and book projects where you'd get books in the mail. And like I know for a while my dad, depending on which of us kids he was dealing with, he would ask us to do book reports, take us to like McDonald's or something. It was a very nice thing. And this is something he especially did with my little brother who needed it. But, there were things like that. Occasionally they'd want to hear the book report, but not so much for a grade. But there was encouragement to do it. And just, and then some of us kids took to it more than the others, I'd say.
It's good. Thank you. And so why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Oh, that's another. Yeah, well, you do ask good questions. I will stop saying that. I think it's because it's almost because we're doing it sometimes when we're not expecting to do it. I feel like we're gathering we may not be gathering it with an end in mind. It may not be a planned gathering of information, but I feel like as often as our brains are working, we're gathering information at some molecular level. Our bodies are doing it. I mean, for crying out loud, we're surrounded by a cloud of creatures we can't see. They're part of us. If we're not consciously gathering information, those little MFs are doing it. And so I feel like it's an nonstop thing, for good or ill.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's one of those things that is an ongoing thing. If
So,
you
you anticipate the next question and almost answered or did answer it is this need or want for us to collect or gather information more innate or more invented?
Well, that it is, I think it leans more like, 73.5% innate and then 26.5, contrived, that kind of thing. Because, right? I mean, we're trying to, whatever it is that we're after, I guess, because we certainly consciously gather information and look for sometimes specific information, which is sometimes scary. But, instead of having an open mind or whatever, asking, like I'll tell you, this is weird. I won't go off the rails too much, but this a person who was a mentor who taught me some playwriting late in life. I mean, I'd been a journalist for many years, and I worked with my friend Jo Carson, the late great Jo Carson, and she used to talk about asking open-ended questions and how important that was. And as a journalist, it was a great lesson for me because here I was whatever, 40-ish. And I was learning this great new lesson that has only helped, really, it's only helped my own writing and story gathering and information gathering, if you will, because so many of the things I've written have been about intentional information gathering. To get back to what you were,
Yeah, it's really good. You're anticipating a lot of areas we're going to go into.
Cool. Well, I don't want to kill that. So sorry, I'm long-winded.
No, don't be sorry. That's good. I like when people. It's a sort of a Mobius strip ongoing. So, um, do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, I think definitely they do. I feel
Yeah,
like they do for sure.
yeah. Then Jerry, fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
Uh, I don't know what I think until well, I want to say been there, done that, but experience it. But we think about, I don't know what I think until I think about it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's, I
Because
mean,
see,
that's,
yeah,
that's the blank for me.
yeah, that's fine. McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. But I'll tell you, the last person I interviewed says, I don't know what I think until I think about it. So it's fine. It's fill in the blank. Can
That's a
human,
great quote from Joan Didion. I didn't know that quote. I've read some of Joan's stuff. My wife is the bigger Joan fan, and certainly the more well-read person in our couplehood. But that is a terrific quote, because that rings very true for a lot of writers. And she spoke it. I mean, she had the she put words to it.
it is, it's, there's a lot more. I have this whole list of people. I, I'm not accessing it right now, but I don't know what I think until, because it varies in many ways where that can go. But can humans think without language?
Oh, yeah. I suppose it's how we think of language. It's how we define, which is kind of a coward's way out, but it's in a way, it's how we define what language is. I mean, can we think without language? Or what does our thought track sound like? And that's a great thing. I think because not everything, but I'm trying to conjure of something I read recently. It's almost as if the story, this was, can we tell story without conventional language? How do
Yeah.
we tell, or can we tell story without, and is story itself some sort of human hierarchical domain that we're sort of we're not really capturing what everything is. It's story. And I think the same would be for language. I think we could intuit without language, and I think intuit maybe precedes our thinking. So that, I don't know. I'm just going to sort of ride the fence there on
That's
that. And
good.
that's a great question. I like
Yeah.
it.
Again, we're going to go a lot deeper into much of what you just brought up. So that was good. But Chomsky says that language is not just words. It's a culture, it's a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is.
Mm.
Jerry, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Mm. Personally, I probably crumble into a fit of tears. um, but that's when language fails. It sounds to me in some ways like writer's block. You know what I mean? And so, which that's I take. When language fails, it's time to take stock. It's time to listen to the silence. And
Right.
I feel like that's the time to do it. That's the time to meditate, perhaps.
It's good. I love that. That silence is a deep. Yeah, Thelonious Monk said, silence is the loudest sound in the universe."
Wow. I love, there's a biography of his that I listened to recently on one of my audiobooks, and it was great. But
Yeah,
anyway, thank you. That's a great quote.
it is great. So your observations of humans in general, it's a stupid question, but it just you're are humans more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Hmm. Well, fun. It seems to me like ideally we're a bit of both, and we're able to function in a healthy way, relying on both. But I feel like we probably, I don't know, we probably overthink. Going back to what we discussed earlier, not a dumb question, but going back to what we discussed earlier, this idea of thought sort of never really kind of taking a rest or never really ending, even when we put it to rest some way. We don't have those moments of silence as often as we could. I admire the people who can create those moments for themselves easier than the rest of us. Who can meditate in a much easier way. Anyway, but I feel like maybe we tend to think more and feel less. Um, my goal is to is to somehow manage to do both.
Yeah. Well, no, it's interesting because you can't separate thinking from thought, but we think we can because we invented the words.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What you said really evoked two things. Bridget Bardot goes, "When I make love, I don't think." And I'm like, "Good luck." You know? How do you do, like, the most sensuous thing your body can do and turn your brain off? I
Well,
mean, it seems as though you would like to, but at the same and then, it's like meditation, you brought that up, is they go, "Okay, now think about not thinking." You know?
yeah.
Yeah, like, how do you think about not thinking? So, anyways, here's, 2 questions from
I'm
Alan
okay
Tur
with the ironies. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like embrace the contradictions, yeah. So,
Yeah.
there's 2 questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Huh. Uh, I don't. I don't think so necessarily. No, I don't believe so. I believe what little I know about the soul, is I'm thinking that as more of a of our spiritual essence, less about thinking. Um, yeah, I think thinking is very much a function of our biology, if you will,
Yep,
and soul not necessarily a function of our biology, if that makes any sense. And
that
and
makes a
that's not.
lot.
I feel like that's not to say every biological thing doesn't have a soul or might have
Yeah,
a soul, but I just feel like there is a. Anyway, that's my 2 cents worth.
that's good. The second Turing question was, can machines think?
Oh well, yeah, in the sense that we can train, you know, some very primitive creatures to think. If or that primitive creatures think. I not that we train paramecium to think, or that we train, lower order mammals to think, but yes, I think machines can think and be trained to think. I'm coming more and more to believe that because of the work I do at Georgia Tech and talking with some of the researchers there. I mean, there is a gap. There's still a long way from machines being human-like. I mean, not to say that they're human-like, um, and there's some real gaps there. That they even as they close the gap, it's like everything else. They're just going to close it in half. They're never going to touch. There are things our brains can do. Our brains, just our flesh and gray matter brains can do that machines simply cannot do. We can't train them to do it. And we
Yeah,
can't build the mathematical formulas because that's what it comes down to. We can't build, the y plus x equaling z to make it happen. I mean,
yeah,
it's it right now. It just doesn't exist for us right now, and I think that's a good thing.
yeah. That's, I love you using the word gap because McLuhan would say, The gap is where the action is. You know,
Wow.
that in betweenness. Because as
Yeah,
soon as you go, okay, we know what it is, everything's in flux, it's always changing. We
you're right.
feel comfortable when we nail something, go, okay, yeah, that.
That's true.
Oh,
That's true. I know scientists who are trying to reach the cradle of life. I mean, they're trying to identify the very seeds, right? And the way they described it to me was beautiful, because I'm a chimp. I mean, relatively, we all are, but they're trained in a different area, this biochemical stuff that I don't understand, but they're coming at it like the way golden spike works, right? So the way one guy was saying it, I'm coming at it from the chemistry angle, and the other guy's like, well, I'm coming at it more from the biology angle. And again, but I like the illusion of coming at it like a golden spike, and it gives me that illusion of that gap in the middle, which does keep changing even for them as they discover more. Oh, it was RNA. Oh no, it wasn't. It was something else. It
yeah,
it's an interesting thing, and it certainly gives them something to do and me something to write about once in a while.
there you go. You know, that's corpus callosum, the space between the right and left hemispheres of the brain. You
Oh,
know, and women can like negotiate better. Men are more linear and they get right brained and left brain, but the women know how to deal with that gap. But
I
I
believe
always love it. Yeah, I always love it because Rain Man, you know, he could memorize the phone book, but he couldn't tie his shoe.
right,
There's no gap. It's
right.
fused. That's
That's
why, yeah,
well. That I have a lot. I've given a lot of thought to matters of the brain, um, the damaged brain, the healthy brain, and all this. My son happens to be a young man with cerebral palsy,
yeah,
and so he has, brain damage, and it's not, as far as we know, he doesn't have an autism thing going on. But I've often wondered about that gap, and
yeah,
is he, again, and to your point, is he more right brained and left brained, or
right,
left brained? There's certain areas that are easily to identify with him, and some not as much, and they still
yeah,
remain a mystery to unveil, to as we go
yeah.
forward.
Now, the mystery's the cool word because in many years ago, they would go, "He's the shaman of the village." And
Yeah,
then they go, "No, he's mentally challenged," or, my
yeah, yeah.
family's in that world, and they go, "It's called neurodiversity." It's like,
Neurodiversity. That's
we're all
great.
neurally diverse.
That's exactly right. My that's the whole thing is, if we're always going to we're going to use words like disability and so
Yeah,
on. That's part of our, there, at least that's better than some other words, and so on. But my point being is, once we get to the place where we recognize that it doesn't have any meaning, we're all there. I mean, we're all, if we think about what disability is, I mean, then we're all disabled. So
exactly.
maybe it's
Yeah,
just a
my
term.
nephew teaches in, like, Syracuse disability to teachers, and he's emotionally disabled, whatever the correct word is. Sorry if I don't get it right.
Right, of
But at
course.
one point, his sister said, Micah isn't disabled, he's specially able. So
Yes,
he has special abilities. He's walking down the street, he'll say hello to everybody. We're
right.
like, well, I'm not going to say hello to that person. And so it's
See,
like he does have special abilities,
that's true. This is what I think. And I think that everybody, to be, without getting Pollyanna about it, everybody has it. We don't all have the opportunity to find it or demonstrate it or whatever. In a perfect world, perfect life, that happens. And, our goal as parents is to help Joe find it as much as he can. He's
Yeah.
21 now, and he's still on a good long journey. And it's all good. It's all cool. It's interesting. It's certainly an interesting journey, and
It's
a different one, different from what I certainly imagined 21 years ago.
right. And it sounds like you have a great attitude about it because
Most days.
um, you know, because I like the subgenius take. It's pull the wool over your own eyes.
Right. Oh, yeah. Listen, that's a big part of it.
That is.
That's totally, you tried it, you pull the wool out, or or you put the blinders on sometimes about some
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
and you're a horse in the race, and you just keep going in the race, and try not to step on anyone, or
Yep.
step in anyone's way, that kind of thing.
Well, you anticipate this one. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Wow. You know, Depends on the day, but lately a lot of it is happiness. I'm looking
Yeah.
for happiness. But then there are. I will say that they often are connected for me. That finding meaning will give me a sort of sense of happiness.
Yeah.
I'm a digger. I tend to be a digger. You know, whatever. I tend to sometimes. I don't know. I wouldn't want to say I don't probe as much as I used to, but finding out something, landing, whatever that realization is, sometimes that gives me happiness, and
Yeah.
sort of how do I put this? It's a sort of an unrealistic. It's like, why am I happy about that? Well,
Yeah.
that's cool. Just knock it away, because I do feel like we're students all our lives if we're lucky, and
Totally.
and uh, and I just feel like you don't want that to go away, and whether you're doing it on purpose or not, but I feel like we're hopefully we're students all our lives.
Agree 100%. I learned that from McLuhan. He says, "I'm just a student." And he was a, professor.
Yeah.
So here's right up your Georgia Tech writings things. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is the brain there, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
Hmm. Wow, that is deep. Um, I think I do believe the consciousness is beyond the tissue and the muscle and the gristle. I believe I don't know if that touches on the spiritual or the other, but so I do feel that we definitely have a stake in creating our consciousness. Separate from that, again, from that tissue. And I don't know what you would call that. I mean, a gift, or is that all, or a curse? I mean,
Yeah.
is that's part of our being self-aware. I believe, and that's the gift and the curse. So
Yeah.
I feel like maybe we definitely have a hand, we being separate from the whatever the poundage of our brain is inside of our head. I'm drawing a blank. I used to know how much the brain weighed, but but
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like we can create. I do feel like it creates separate. Without the brain, they're in partnership. Without our brains, we lose the tools. But without our souls, if you will,
Yeah.
um, the brain can't create it. That consciousness.
I like the word partnership. It's really well put. Now, what's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Oh, good. It depends on the person and the disorder. I would say purely scientifically, speed of light.
Yeah.
But I've written. It's funny because I've written that phrase "speed of thought" a few times when I'm describing a guitar player, like so and so plays faster than the speed of thought. I know I've written it at least twice for two different guitar. Which is like to do that, but I'm weak like anyone else.
Well, who? Let me guess. Jimmy Herring's one of them.
You totally hit it. You totally hit the nail
Who's
on the
the
head.
other one? Who's the other one?
Probably John McLaughlin.
Wow, that's amazing. They just toured together.
But John, I know. Listen. That was a. I will say this: when they toured together, this was a couple years now. I did come to tears when they started playing. They started
Oh,
playing one of the Mahavishnu songs, and I can't remember which one it was, but it was both of their bands together.
yeah.
Just a magnificent set, and I swear I was like, it was one of those bucket list moments. Because I'd for years, when I was a little kid, Mahavishnu was a big deal. My older brother, who just had his 68th birthday, turned me on to Mahavishnu Orchestra, right? So I grew up listening to that stuff and just being really inspired by it. And then to hear it live, I'd never seen John McLaughlin. I'd seen
Yeah.
Jimmy Herring a number of times, and I loved him, and he's always inspiring. But this was the Mac Daddy, the master, and it was almost too much. I mean, I was
Yeah.
like, oh, this is one of those moments, and I wrote it. It was wonderful.
That's
Just
cool because I saw Intermounting Flame Mahavishnu Orchestra open for ELP at Cobo Hall in Detroit, and people threw shit at them because they did. It was it was new at that point. Intermounting Flame had not become this epic,
right,
iconic album yet, and
right.
so they were like, "Hey, we're here for Keith Emerson and ELP."
Right. And I love them too. I mean,
Right.
but I can't imagine a better pairing than those two. Those are like one of those dream, shows. It's like, oh, well,
Yeah.
if we were to have a show with, ELP or Mahavishnu Orchestra, who'd be the good open? That's one.
The poet Audre Lorde says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rayner responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Well, the one that I am a true devotee of, hooked on, and this is a person who writes, and at least I've written one book, and I'm going to write more. I hope. I got another one coming. I love to write, and I love paper, and I was in printing many years ago. Audiobooks, the audiobook tool.
Nice.
I admit I love it. I haven't given up, putting my hands on print and using print at all. But I find that I get more reading done with the audiobook, because oftentimes it'll be whatever I might be doing. So I'm driving, for example, and that's a great time to listen. I can focus on the book enough, the story, and I can focus on track. But I do enjoy, and sometimes just at home, it's fun, just, as a relaxing sort of sit back. Anyway, so that's my current tool, I guess.
What new toy do you suggest?
That's
or gravitate towards? Yeah.
I was going to say along the same lines. I'm not a big audiophile. I'm not just because I don't have. I love to listen. I love listening to. So I would say, this is kind of a toy thing. My daughter got me for I can't remember. It was Father's Day. A thing. It's basically a speaker, and I use it for my phone. And so for the aforementioned stories and for music, I turn that thing on and I'll have music playing. It sounds great. So, a little set, whatever to enhance your.
Those portable speakers have amazing quality.
It's amazing. It's called I'm not giving them a plug because I'm sure they make others, but it's called a Sonos.
Yeah.
And I admit I'm a chimp. I've only logged in my music and my books on it right now. I know I could do, phones and other things, but right now it does what I need it to do. And that's a toy that I would sort of recommend, a tool, if you will.
That's good. Jerry, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
A lot. I don't sleep very well very many nights. Sometimes it's the usual 60-year-old man stuff. Just the usual. Am I going to get a full night's sleep because I got to pee? That's been happening, certainly the last 5 years, that, but more to the point, more that I'll spend more time on, because that happens regardless of whether I think of it or not. But I will occasionally perseverate on it. Is my son and family issues. It's always a question. It's always a challenge. It's always a challenge. Even the best days with a boy or a young man, really tougher with a young man than when he was a boy with significant disabilities, is a challenging day. So often those are the thoughts that are in my head. And it depends, the things that'll keep me awake are the thoughts in my head at night. if it might be a health thing. I had a stroke about 4 years ago,
Yeah.
and I never used to give thought to my own health, right? I mean, I just sort of lived life, and it was an accidental kind of thing. It was something that was totally unseen. I'm in decent shape. It was a heart ailment that I didn't know I had since birth.
Wow.
So what's happened is in the last 4 years, I have a host of new things to think about. And I tend not to worry about that as much, though, because, I do the right things to make sure that
Good.
I don't have another stroke and so on. But so, there's always something to think about.
Yeah, it seems you have the right attitude, but I have to tell you the pee joke. The guy goes to the doctor and he says, "Doctor, I'm having trouble peeing." He says, "How old are you?" He says, 85. He said, "You peed enough."
That reminds me of a man I know.
Marshall McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists and artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we humans ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Because, well, for one reason, we don't pay enough attention to the artists. The artists don't. The artists are not the best self-marketers, even though some of them are the best marketers. Without trying. Like if you've seen, where do you live, Jerry? Out west,
Venice,
right?
Venice, California. Yeah.
So, so if you're in the city, or you'll see art, sort of speaking for itself on the streets or whatever.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's a sort of a roundabout way of.
No, you answered it. That was good. Do artists have moral obligation?
Well, I don't know if it's moral obligation. I don't know if that's fair. Personal obligation, I feel, may be more critical for their own well-being. And then again, it's funny when I think about artists' questions, and I don't know why this comes up. Maybe I've seen too many movies and read too many jokes or whatever. But Hitler was a wannabe artist, right? And so what were Hitler's fucking obligations? So I think that he should have had some moral obligations and maybe wouldn't have been I don't know. But but it's a great question. I don't know that they do have moral obligations. I don't think. I feel like that's probably not. That's too universal and maybe unfair for artists who all have so many different motivations. And I could never. I'll never be able to get. Excuse my French. I'll never get my head around all of it.
Well, that's the mystery. That's the beauty of art. Auden the poet says the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. We want to think, you reach nirvana seeing Jimmy and John. Right. But we don't know, was it in the long run, is that pacifying you or activating you? Well, you and me know that activated us, but it could just good, So anyways, it's an interesting paradox that we can continue.
You're right. It's funny. And the paradox works both ways. It activated us on a very, I don't want to say visceral level, but certainly at a physical level. I mean, it really activated me, but it pacified my soul in a way that made me feel, it was weird. It was almost like you get those moments where you feel like, I don't know if everything is right is the right. That's not quite the right phrasing, but everything is how it ought to be. Yeah. Good, bad, and indifferent have no meaning. But the feeling is positive. The feeling is like this is as it should be. And it's a powerful feeling. And it's beyond, for me, I don't know, sometimes positive, negative. And some music is like that. Some art is like that. Yeah. I mean, it should be, the best art is most certainly like that, I would guess. I'm not an art critic by any stretch, but but it feels like some of the best art does that. And sometimes it could be the same piece of music, but it's only the third or fourth time that you heard it that it hits you in that way. And
Yeah.
it's same with a painting, sometimes it depends on when you're seeing and when you're listening and all of the other, equations in your soul that add up to that moment.
Yeah. It's really amazing because you really evoked the McLuhan line. If it worked, we want things to work, but
Yeah.
in the big picture, if it's working, then it's obsolete. That's a real hard one because when I was a kid, I made up my first aphorism. I said, if it works, break it. That's the American way. Because we're constantly, it's like planned obsolescence.
Yes, yes.
We need things to break down. Like kids, they bond with their dads because they fix a car, or I know how to tinker we all have the workbench in the
Yes,
hearts.
yes,
Your dad, I know how to fix things, hammer and nail. So
yes.
are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Ooh, that's a great question, boy. It vacillates. It really does, and I don't know if it's a function of my aging, and because I'll admit, I'm probably more of the angry old man than I certainly was when I was 40, right? I mean, and so how I think and feel, and I feel like the angry old man tends to gravitate toward this comfort zone of old ideas, but I try to keep the alert on so that
Yeah.
it's like, well, that's the comfortable fallback gravity position. And so don't be comfortable with it, and be open to new ideas.
Yeah.
So I don't know, comfortable. And please repeat the question. Did you say comfortable with, or?
Well, that's funny. Yeah, that's a good way to translate it. Are you more afraid of old ideas or more afraid of new ideas? Yeah.
I see. I think in context of recent times I would say I'm more afraid of old ideas.
Yeah.
So in that context, meaning the picture of the world
Yeah.
politically, geopolitically, because it seems like the old ideas has sort of keep leading to these ugly sort of paths and results. And I'm as guilty as the next person. It's that old thing about insanity when you repeat something over and over and expect it to be different kind of deal. I mean, it's whatever the old trite saying, but there's
Yeah.
a truth and wisdom to that. And so I think that I would probably say I'm a little more afraid of old ideas, even if some of the old ideas feel comfortable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
Wow. Yes, I can. One of my the earliest memory I think that I can two, and I don't know what one of them is a function of an actual memory that I have never seen a picture of. The other one involves a picture that I've seen, but I know I remember the feeling. And that was the earlier memory. The earlier memory, I would have been 3, 4, and I was kissing a girl. It was my next door neighbor, and for years we were like, quote, girlfriend and boyfriend, because like my family moved away from New York to Florida when I was like 6 or 7, but we wrote letters to each other for. I mean, we even. God forbid she's listening to this. I know we're miles, but here's the thing: we're miles apart politically. I don't even think we're friends on social media these days. But I will say that even when we were like 14 or 15 and family reunions would go back and we'd make out, that kind of thing. So some of that might be my earliest memory was this girl that was next
Yeah.
door from us. I won't even give her name. And part of that is because we did have I remember a home movie of us kissing over a fence, but for some reason I have memories of that house. And that was in Polk Avenue, East Northport, New York. And I must have lived there till I was about 4. And anyway, the other oldest memory would be when we lived in Queens. We moved from there to Queens, Richmond Hill, and I must have been about 4. And it was, believe it or not, you remember what maypoles were? The
Yeah.
maypole.
Yeah.
So it was a maypole event at one of the PS, they called the schools PS, public school. This was public school 51. I'll never forget because I went to kindergarten and first grade there. But this was before that. And my mom took me because my older siblings were there. And I think my brother was performing in the maypole thing, whatever the hell it was. I have vague memories of it. But I remember being there for that, and so it must have been, I was probably 4 because it was before I was in kindergarten. So those are 2 memories that are fairly clearish.
Is
That certain substances haven't burned away yet.
yeah. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, wow. In my case, this is the thing. This is a judgment call. It's a blessing for me
Yeah.
because most of my memories are good memories.
Yep.
And the bad ones are those that I can conjure up, like my father dying. I can conjure that up and be sad, or a certain date will come up, right? But even when I think of him, I have joyful memories because he's, he was a good man and all that and all of these things. So for me, it's a blessing. But I also know, but being trying to be an empathetic person, I also know that it's a curse for many people,
Yeah.
and I've seen what a curse it can be, and seen how those things can be deadly. Seen memories themselves can be deadly. To in the wrong hands, if
Yeah.
to use a bad dark joke. But
No, it's now tell me just briefly someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, who had an impact on you like a role model, and what specifically was the impact?
sure thing. Well, I already told you about my dad. I think that would be a good one to stick with because I could go with my older brother as well. And both of them had.
Just mainly what you get from your dad and what you mainly get from your older brother.
Well, yeah, for sure. Like my dad, I think this sense of love of family, love of life, trying to see the joy, because yeah, he came on, and it's funny. It ties back into Colonel Bruce, which I get into later if you want. But I thought that Dad had very humble upbringing. He never knew his father. He came up, Sicilian American family in New York, very poor. I can't remember 6 or 7 kids that his mom had, that my grandmother Nana had, and so it was very challenging. Very self-made man in many ways, but never one of those hard ass. It was funny because like as he got older, and he was always like, not that this matters, but he was always more of a progressive thinker, liberal kind of thinker. So he encouraged us to do what you want to do, that kind of thing. And he was a seat of his pants kind of guy. He dropped out of school, became an executive, and loved his family, was devoted, was fun, took us on vacations, would talk to you and listen to you, right? So all these things that affected me. I don't know that I have any of that as a father. It's hard to self-assess, but it's good to have had that guide and to know sort of what to think about and look for in your own self, right? And
Yeah.
and he was a good model for me that way, as that older sort of man. And then my brother for things like music, being a younger man, and he was 7 years older than me, so he was influential enough that he could be the big guy that, if you got to hang around with him and his friends, you felt cool and you were picking up on good music and, good habits, but fun, good times, and also philosophy and, digging deep into some of the things that he was into, right? He was willing to share. He had been in the Navy and had lived, right? So he was a cool older sibling that way, teaching you literally the old-fashioned thing, how to play catch, how to play ball. My brother, more than my father, was the sports teacher because I've always loved sports. And it was more from my brother in terms of the playing of it and getting, good enough to play it. And my father in terms of thinking about it and wanting to write about it. Because the whole reason I'm writing this new book I'm working on is because of my father.
That
Yeah.
was really articulate Jerry. You really get what I'm after. I appreciate this. So now, just briefly, someone outside your immediate family who had an impact on you.
Oh, of course. Well, there are a few I can think of. It's funny. I'll think of this professor that I had. Now, you don't often. I don't have honestly. I very checkered educational, very checkered. I should say, institutional educational experience. Right. I was never a big fan. I went to more colleges than I can remember. But all that to say is, I went to several colleges, and the last one I went to, I had a practicum teacher. Right. He was sort of like the like an engineer has a capstone teacher, and where they have to do a project, right, to show. Whereas this guy was a practicum, was teaching us how to be writers for a deadline and for a publication, which was an important lesson, I mean, because I've had great teachers who taught us about writing for the love of writing, which I always felt like, well, it is a love of writing, but there's also, you have to understand that there's work, that it's work, and should take it seriously as work. And this professor taught me that. And I'm not saying that it all sunk in. I'm not saying I've got the best work ethic, but he pushed me at a time that I needed it at that young age, because honestly, he probably wouldn't agree with this, but because of what I felt I learned in his class and talking with him and so on, I quit school and went to work. Right. So
Yeah,
I felt like that was the whole point of it.
that's it.
That was the whole point of, I thought of it as college was for me. I mean, there was definitely a whole lot more that was going on that was interesting. The woman who became my wife, number one, but all that to say is that, yeah, I think that professor, Howard Schneider, is a good. I mean, he's a good one to start, because there've been many, but he's a
Yeah.
good one when I want to go back and think about, well, where I am today, how the hell I've stayed with it this long. He has something to do with that, because he was one of those early guys who was actual teacher, and he was an editor. He was an editor at Newsday, one of the largest daily newspapers in the country. And so, like, I felt like I was learning from the real guy,
The
and
real deal. Yeah. So
yeah,
did your parents raise you a particular religion?
yeah, yes and no. We started out as Catholic. We started out going to church every Sunday, going to catechism. By the time they got to my youngest brother, the fifth child, they were like, enough of this. Like, for example, they were funny about it. All right. My parents were very funny about it, because, like, I'm not going to ever mock it, because, it's people believe in this, and I may not share whatever, but, somebody's heart and soul, like my mom, she's still Catholic, right? But she's always been a more liberal Catholic. Like, I mean, she
Yeah.
knows reality versus some of the, I don't know, the sacramental religious
Yeah.
bullshit, if you will, in the Catholic faith that, I saw from an early age, and a lot of my siblings did, but we went through confirmation, I think, was the last thing. Or for some of us, like, I even got married in the Catholic Church, because my wife's family was extremely Catholic. Not my
Yeah.
wife, but her family, her mom in particular, were from the old country, from Malta. They were very Catholic. And so there were things that we did to just sort of keep peace, and also sort of meditate. There was some meditation there. There was some really good opportunity to pray in the way that you felt comfortable praying. You didn't necessarily have to know all of the rules of Catholicism, like because I've lost touch with a lot of the rules by the time I got married in the church, and so it was
Yeah.
like, all of that to say is, so I came up Catholic, but by the time I was a young guy, my parents were like, we'd ask them a philosophical question like, Mom, am I going to go to hell? Because, like, you might have gotten in trouble or something,
Yeah.
gotten punished. Am I going to go to hell? And she'd say, did you kill anybody? No. Did you steal from the poor? No. Then shut up. You're all right. It was like,
Okay. Like, perfect follow-up, Jerry. If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
oh, well, I'd like him to say, you know, uh, Welcome, smoking or non-smoking.
Good, good sense of humor. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Ooh, that's a great. See, that's a that I think evil people exist. I say that because if I say that evil, whatever, chooses people,
Yeah,
not saying, I'm not trying to mathematicize this, but it goes back to some of my own misunderstandings and maybe disagreements with some of the faiths, regarding evil and hell and the source of evil and being an outside thing that, sort of, I sometimes feel like we've done a wonderful job in some ways of absolving ourselves of responsibility of some things, whether we call that evil or stupidity. That's a big question. I mean, that's a big question. And I go back to my dear friend, Joe Carson, who would get me to think deeper than I usually do. Um, we wrote this play together, and there was this character in purgatory, and he's meeting his horse. And his horse is going to decide whether he goes to the good place or the bad place, right? Because what had happened, this was based, all these plays we did were based on true stories, but then we would extrapolate, and we would give them, you know, oomph, and give them change the names to protect the guilty and all of that. Well, anyway, so they're in purgatory, and basically the guy the horse was he had left his horse. That was the story. This dude, it was a great story. This man who had loved his horse, used to go everywhere, into the bar, up the stairs, everywhere with his horse in our little mountain town here. And the dude just disappeared one day, just disappeared. Nobody knows if he was killed by, drug smugglers, if he just ran off or what, but he left this horse that he loved tied up in the back. The horse lived for many years later. I mean, I even got to meet the horse, and which was very cool. But so we're setting the story in purgatory, and he's being judged by the horse, basically. And so the horse asks the man, well, you got to figure out, John Boy. We made the guy's name, no, Jim Bob. The guy's name was John Boy, the real guy, but we named him Jim Bob in the story. So Jim Bob, you got to ask yourself, were you bad or were you stupid? And that'll determine which stairway you take, that kind of thing, toward evil or toward good. And I just love that, because it's at the end of that part of the play, you don't know. He exits, and it's this sad scene where he's and the horse was a puppet. We had this great puppeteer make this cool puppet that's standing on the bar, because it's the bar in purgatory, and the guy can't drink. It's beautiful because he can't get a drink. The bartender's toying with him. What do you have, bud? Give me a Budweiser. So he pours him a water, and he's, and then the horse is toying with him. And then it ends where, he's kind of sad, and he pets the horse, and he walks off stage, and it's left to the audience to decide if he was bad or if he was stupid.
That's nice. Leaving it to them. That's that's brilliant writing.
All credit goes to Joe. That's all credit to my friend Joe Carson. She was.
Anyway. Sounds like so. The hidden question here, really, Jerry, is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I'll set it up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you react to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
That's a powerful recognition. I kind of there's a part of me that agrees with that. It doesn't necessarily mean you're when I hear that, it doesn't say, it leaves the opportunity for dialogue open. That leaves the opportunity for a dialogue open. It doesn't mean you're going to be friends with the so-called enemy, or you're going to be enemies with that definite enemy, whatever. I have, I don't know, maybe it's my Libra-ness. I have a real hard time sometimes. I'm such a thinking about this idea of enemies, and we do. I feel like we often do create them. When they do create themselves, how much of that is, how many degrees away? How many degrees are we connected to that? Right? I sometimes think of that. And anyway, to answer your question about Watt's comment, I'm kind of with him there. I'm
Yeah.
kind of with him.
No, that's beautiful. In fact, American Indians say your enemy is your best teacher. So it is, how do you process? I love this keep dialogue, because when you were talking about older and new ideas, the old idea is you resolve conflicts between countries with military. It's like,
Yeah.
no, why don't we resolve conflict with negotiation and talking and conversation first? And then, if, I don't even want to,
Yeah,
it's
I don't
just,
even want to consider that. Yeah.
I don't even want to consider military. Why did that even get in the picture? But anyways, let's move on. So James Joyce said as the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago, he's basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't
Ooh.
we just live life?
Ooh. Why do we just live life? I think sometimes it's because we don't even recognize our own stories. And
Yeah,
sometimes we have to see it in somebody else. And not
yeah,
that I don't know, I personally think it's important to try to understand what our story is, and know that it's okay that the story changes and evolves with time. But sometimes I feel like, as somebody who's written some of that stuff and tried to write it in a way that was authentic and empathetic, so that a person seeing it could be entertained. You want I mean, I feel like that's part of it. You want there to be entertainment value. I feel like for them to, that's not the lowest thing, but that's the thing you want to kind of get. But you also, for the kind of plays we were doing, and part of it was our mission, I think, in doing these, there had to be some sort of a meaning to it as well, if that makes sense. As sort of it was entertainment, but you also had to be a functionality to it.
yeah,
And in telling that other story, like sometimes telling a hard story, but giving it a resolution. Like, in other words, a person may not give that story I'll give you a quick example. And I don't know if this gets us too far afield, and I'm sorry if it does, but
no
one of
worries.
the one of the stories was this a woman who had been abused by her mother. She had been abused by her mother. This is from another play that I'm familiar with that a friend wrote, but this is a perfect example of where. But she had been abused by her mother. This is how she told the story, because how we gather the stories is important as well. I mean, that's an important. You people own their stories. You want permission to use a story. That's one thing I've learned. You want permission to use that, and anyway, that's critical. And you're also asking permission to take license as an artist with the story, because that's another part of it. And so with this woman who was abused as her mother, had been chased up a burning tree. No, had been chased up a tree by a mad woman with an axe handle, and who then lit the tree on fire to scare the hell out of this girl who was her stepdaughter. This is the story the girl told. And, that doesn't really have much of an ending to it. What the other thing, when the story gatherer asked, well, whatever happened to your stepmother? Well, she became an old, sad woman living in a home, and people would have to take suppers to her because nobody liked, because she was so cantankerous. It was a sad life, right? So the writer gave some license to this woman who had been victimized as a child, so that at the end, it was this woman who was delivering the meals to this mother who could have been her enemy, right?
Wow.
She's given this woman power. She's given this woman license because the old one. There's a sick part of me. Don't get me wrong. Also, that realizes that the old woman, knowing the type of person she was probably frightened. When is she going to poison me? When is
Yeah.
she going to kill me? Meanwhile, the daughter knew this, but that's not why she was doing it. It was almost a meditation for her, the way it was written. And it was written in a way that it made it beautiful, that it wasn't a way of gotcha. It wasn't a revenge sort of way. You never had to say, I showed her, but you gave this person who had been victimized some agency, and some license. I thought that was the big lesson I learned from sometimes learning from fiction, sometimes learning more from fiction than I do from
Non
reality.
Yeah, from reality. That's good because it leads into this. Hollis Frampton, great filmmaker, says narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Talked about narrative and telling. Can you forget to die?
Wow. I think you can. I think you can convince yourself. I think you can forget that you're going to die.
Yeah.
I think when you really are living in the moment, which is harder than it sounds, at least for me, to really be in that place, to lose that self-awareness that we're all transient kind of, flesh and blood transit systems, carrying microbiome with us. But I don't know. I guess you can forget to die.
Yeah.
You can sometimes you can forget to die. There are some. I'll admit that I've had harsh thoughts before where I've said, "Boy, that some bitch has lived a lot longer than he was supposed to."
But Jerry, I've figured from talking to you this long, you wrote a successful book. You're writing a second book. You're really a writer. That's the bottom line. You're a writer. So what first attracted you to pursue writing? Because you did some sports reporting and you did some playwrights. When you're growing up, where's the tipping point? You go, oh, that's what I want to do.
That's a good question. I can kind of pinpoint it. It goes back to my old man. He had written a book, never got it published. So I have a bucket list that I have to attend to, right? But I have to attend to that's the bucket list to do right by Dad. But I have to do right by Jerry first. So I've got some books I need to write, but I would like to get his book published. So like when I was a teenager and I didn't know what the hell I wanted to do, when I was 15, 16, 17, because by that time I had figured out I wasn't good enough to play center field for, the Yankees, or whatever, because I didn't have any real thoughts about work and what career would be, and then you start thinking of those things. I always liked to draw and write. And I thought I was going to be a cartoonist, because I used to do these sort of, but I wasn't as, the problem for me, Jerry, is I've never been much of a student, I like to do things, not to say that, that I do enough things by any stretch, but I didn't take art classes like I probably should have. So the cartoons I did were crude. They were meant to be, and they were meant to be clever and dark and whatever, the kind of stuff I was into as a teenager. And I thought that kind of, well, this might be something I could do. And but then, my dad started writing and submitting manuscripts, and I'm thinking, holy shit, that's a real job. And it got me to be on the school newspaper and just tried a little bit. That was at first, I didn't really like it. But then when I got into college, I liked it. It was one of those things about college I did like, as opposed to some of the classes. Some of the classes were great and some of them were, but the newspaper work was what really attracted me. So that was around the time, college age, when I thought, I really want to do this. I I love the idea of newspapering because back then it was a real thing. They made a difference in communities. There was a sense of your writing, you knew it was going to be read before it made it to the bird cage or the cat box, at least in the communities I grew up in,
Yeah.
and so I liked that. I liked, and I also was attracted to being a newspaper editor in a small town because when I was young, and I'm actually, my wife and I have been together a very long time. We met in college. So in college, we both read the same book, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was about a group of college kids. It was two things. It was a group of college kids up in New England, some hippies who had started their own newspaper, or they bought their own newspaper and was like, that's us, we're going to do that. That was our thing. And then we read this other, around the same time, concurrently, there was a story about a similar newspaper out west in Point Reyes. You might know the paper up further north from you, of course, the Point Reyes Light. I don't know if it's still there, but it's anyway, it was a little paper, made all these headlines, and we're in journalism school at the time and thinking, man, that's what we're going to do. And
Yeah.
so anyway, that's sort of what drew me to it.
It gave you hope. That was beautiful because a screenwriting teacher told me a great film or a great newspaper, book, music is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker.
Wow.
What role does intention play in your creative process? And I mean, you can divide it when you were writing your play or you're writing your Colonel Bruce Hampton book. What role does intention play?
A whole hell of a lot. I mean, almost everything. It's funny because it's not being a jazz musician. I equate it to, the way, and I'm no expert at all on music, but as an observer and a listener, when I observe a jazz musician creating something in the moment, it's still built on a whole body of intention. It's not, yes, I've heard artists say like, well, the music's there and I'm just conjuring the notes. Yeah, I believe there is an esoteric sense of the music coming through the person and the person being the vessel. Yes. But there's intention happening to take those, those rudiments and those resources. And I feel like that's where the art kind of comes in, is with the intention, as opposed to, otherwise, if there's no intention and again, I'm not an art critic. I don't understand a lot. I don't understand shit. But if there's no intention at all, then Jackson Pollock didn't mean shit when he was, then that's just a bunch of paint that he spilled, and that you could say that for many different works of art that we either don't comprehend or don't spend time with or whatever. But I do think intention is a big part of it. It is for me, but that's anyway. Yeah, I would say it's a big part.
No, you covered it. And Marcel Duchamp said, "There's no art without an audience." How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your play or writing the Colonel Bruce Hampton book?
A good bit, but I'm thinking, I'm my first critic, and here's the weird thing. I don't use an outline most of the time, right? Like, so like to get the book published, I had to create an outline, right? So, and that was one goal I had, was I don't know what this is, probably an ego thing more than anything. I'm as weak as anybody when it comes to ego. And I wanted somebody else to publish the book, right? For a number of reasons. It's expensive. I don't have the money to do it. I probably could have raised the money, but it's an ego thing too. It's nice to say that this publisher thought it was a good enough story. And so in thinking of the reader, I was thinking of the first few eyes to look at it, mine, and then the editor I was going to send it to, right? So that's who I was thinking about. And since I didn't know the editor very well, it was mainly, what do I like? And I feel like I'm enough of an everyman that I was a good judge. So there's a part of me that thinks of the reader. And don't get me wrong, I feel like that's something that when I was in journalism, full time, like when I was a magazine editor and writer, that we often put the reader last. Put fuck the reader. Did we sell an ad? That kind of thing. That's the way so much of paid journalism is, right? Not that the writers are there for the right reasons. Almost all of them. And the journalists, they're there to dig and to be a voice for, right? I do feel that's true. But anyway,
well, you really led into some questions I want to probe, and I wanted to, before we go there, say McLuhan said everything we invent extended some humanness. So knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a projector or a camera is an extension of our eyelid. Even things like religion or philosophy they're not tangible, might be an extension of consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? Whether it's a pencil or a pen or a keyboard, what humanness does the writing utensil extend?
Ooh. It all comes down to, this is a weird thing, and it's become clearer to me in the last 4 years. I mentioned that stroke earlier. Look at this finger.
Yeah, I can see it. Yep.
And this one not as bad, but
yeah.
All right. So my fingers, the fingers of the human part.
Your fingers. That's amazing. You know what McLuhan said? Yeah, I just have to interject. You know what McLuhan said the movie films extend? Your foot. Because you're traveling. But see, usually all writers are real like metaphor, and I wanted to talk about metaphor with you too, but it's like they usually go my soul or my teeth. And you go my fingers. That is a practical answer. It's the writing utensil extends writing in the sand.
Everything comes to this. Everything from here and here and wherever the soul and the heart and the brain, it all comes out of this eventually. And you know what? This is the thing I've come to learn. It's different for everybody. There are people who have none of this. And so what their appendage for them is either the tool. Sometimes it's the tool that they use, or it is their heart and their soul. That's where
that's fine. Yeah.
It's all reality.
Like, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, Jerry, but that one you got right.
It works for me, man.
But the two words you brought up in that last little thing was amazing because you anticipated this. Two of my other film heroes say, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And talk about jazz, the avant-garde jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Right. So again, it's a stupid question. It's just a jumping off point. But is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology, cultures, or environments are dominant?
Yeah, in your toolkit. I think I think it's a bit of both. It really is. When it's working well, when it's working well, there's a stream of consciousness or subconsciousness that's helping to keep the expression flowing. Sometimes it's how to self-expression. Boy, you have so many choices, right? And I've been known to pick the wrong ones, the wrong and the right ones. But for some reason, the ones I perseverate on and worry about and lose sleep over are the wrong ones. The ones when I've expressed myself and that's getting beyond art. That's just communication. And when I felt like I've had to apologize, for example, is when I've expressed myself in the wrong way. And so I've learned all of those ways. And sometimes that's a stream of consciousness without thinking. And I know haven't quite answered the question, but that's where my brain.
Because here's what you did earlier, which I loved in a way, because you started talking about intention. And then it was different than self-expression, or is it the same as self-expression? Because motives and all that. But the real hidden question here, because you brought up this word, is can art making be egoless?
You know what? I do think it can be
Yeah.
egoless. I really do. And you know when I feel like it works best as an egoless endeavor is when it's an ensemble effort. You
Yeah.
know, that's the trick, because how do you do that when you've got, you know, 4, 5, 30 people involved?
Yeah.
And when you could remove ego and create a self-repairing ensemble, you know, then that's sort of a beautiful thing. That's sort of art happening almost automatically. This is weird, not to get off on a tangent, but and not to advocate anything at all. But when I was much, much younger and had a print, we had a family had a print shop. Talk about art working through you. And my brothers and friends and I had a big job to do. We had to get it done by the next morning.
Yeah.
We had several printing presses going. It was, you know, small presses. It wasn't a big web press, hand presses, a lot of heavy equipment. And I know this is not advocacy, but we had all taken psychedelics. And part of it was to, well, because we had planned to take them that night. Well, you know, we'll get the job happened. And this is it, this is why I say I don't advocate this, but it was one of those stream of consciousness things. Everything happened like a river. There were no mistakes. We got we got done quickly, and we wound up playing frisbee in the parking lot till like 4 a.m. We had time to kill. It was the weirdest thing, but it came through us. There was a certain amount of art and productivity that was coming through us that was happening without any real motive. Well, there were motives, but I know
that's like that's how they're selling microdosing now, or not selling, but they're promoting microdosing, and we never thought in our lifetime that they would be doing this, and it's legit in every, you know, and Michael Pollan's on Netflix. And,
yes.
So no, it's good. But you brought up one thing I wanted to go back really quick was, can the art be egoless? Now, I just started asking that question, and 90% of people would go, no, it can't. There's always ego. And then one person came along and said, good art is egoless. And then a couple weeks ago, a guy goes, it must be egoless. And it was just like you sort of summarized it all. You said, like, you get a group together, and in essence, most art is collaboration. No matter what you're doing, there's still some collaboration.
And you know, it's funny, Jerry, putting words to it for me has been Colonel Bruce, because he used to talk about that all the time. Now, I said he put words to it. I experienced it in those those plays, for example. It would be me and another writer working together. And then you'd have a production team, the director. And there were one of my colleagues who's another mentor for me. And I can say that because he's 6 or 7 years older than me. And I hope he listens to this and gets pissed off. But I really, he's just an absolute incredible writer. Another Jerry. And he used to say, and he didn't make this up, he'll tell you he didn't make this up, but don't be attached to the outcome. And it was a great way of looking at this idea of sort of teamwork, if you will, the way artists work together. And because that was a thing where you were writing things and you had to be willing to kill your babies, and you had to be willing to take chances, or sometimes not take chances, or maybe wait 3 years to take that chance. You know, it's all anyway.
Yeah, that's Andy Warhol said, don't worry about what people think of your art, just keep making it.
Wow, that's
and then Cocteau nailed it. He said, when you get your first criticism of your first art, take, you know, your family or your friend or your teacher says, you know, take that criticism and exploit it the rest of your career. That is an amazing. You got to lean in a little, dude. You're off the picture.
Oh, okay, sorry. That's hilarious.
No, that's all right. But that Cocteau is amazing, because you don't want you want to tell your kid, they show you their first piece of art, you want to say, well, this is good, Junior, but, and then they will go, okay, thanks for giving me the but. Now I'm going to sweat, which is perfect, because you call it wrong ones. And you anticipated this question beautifully. Moshe Feldenkrais says, it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me, tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Huh. You know, it's all a matter of perception, isn't it? What we think of as weakness and what we think
Right,
of as
right,
strength.
right. Whenever you, yeah, yeah,
So that's so let me think about that. I want to think about how I've altered my thinking on that, because I think that is a great question. Opening yourself up, I think, to be more sensitive and vulnerable in a sense. I know it's a very trite sort of answer, but it's true. I feel like with writing, you can open yourself up to do that, even if it's not a memoir or a first person, right? You
yeah,
got to write in a way that's, and again, that's here I am going into like, this is how I write, but that's sort of what I used to think of as a weakness. Maybe was being like, oh, being sensitive, and that you touched on a great point earlier, and that was the female who has the ability to be in touch with both sides of the brain. If
yeah,
God wills, if we all could do that, I mean,
yeah,
that's one of those things that that's another thing I will say I learned from Colonel Bruce was this idea of history and herstory, and thinking of the opposite. Now he turned it into an art form in his own way, but I remember doing that too as a kid, trying to think of the opposite, and the opposite, saying the opposite of something, and to get myself comfortable. That wasn't the intention. It was because I thought it was clever. But I think in doing it, it makes me more comfortable with some of those things that I might have ascribed weak, and maybe some things I ascribed strong to have become a weakness, and I know that's the truth.
yeah,
I know that's the truth too. I know that some things that I used to think were a sign of, I don't know, strength, maybe I now see as a sign of overaggression or ugliness that didn't need to be.
yeah,
Anyway, my thinking has shifted on that, and
yeah,
how I use it. Um, I think that probably using things like this, like sensitivity, in a way of being a less Hemingway, a less Hemingway style of approaching the story. Let's
that's
put it
good.
that
No,
way.
you really got the question well and the answer to it. I appreciate that. But you brought up perception. Is perception reality?
Wow. For some people, it is. Sometimes I fear that that's the struggle I have as a person, as a human, as a man, as a father and a husband, is and a citizen, is trying to overcome certain perceptions of myself and the people I mentioned around me. And so sometimes, in a dangerous way, perception does become a reality. And I think when you realize that it's just that it's a perception, you start accepting. I think you accept a little bit more about what's happening, or at least for me. And maybe I'm talking myself through this,
Yeah,
but but yeah, I do think that sometimes perception creates reality. But I also am enough of a pragmatist to realize that time's going to move in whatever direction it moves in, and the Earth's going to keep spinning in its direction, regardless of anything else.
yeah.
There are certain irrefutables that I accept, but very few absolutes that I accept.
Beautiful. That's Lily Tomlin says reality is just a collective hunch.
That's one of the best things I've ever heard.
That is so good. So fill in the blank, Jerry. Anger can be a productive emotion when.
Ooh, let me think about that. Hmm. For me, not often. Um,
Yeah.
but I will say, and that's not to say I don't get angry. That's again, that's a struggle. I want to, the inner anger, the outer anger. But uh, when, I will say, when when I'm trying to advocate,
Yeah.
anger
It's
is
good.
important. When I need to advocate, when I need to, when I need to be, not personally, but even again better as part of a whole, as of a group, to be heard.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and that's not to say to be heard in anger, how you channel that, but sometimes you need anger to really inspire that. I found that to be a very real useful
Yeah.
tool in terms of advocacy.
But it's almost you reverted to the way I asked the question for about 30 years. I used to say, can anger be a productive emotion? And then people would go yes or no.
Right.
And then I switched it. And so every once in a while, people go back and go, anger can't be a productive emotion. And I mean, you sussed it out because
Yeah. I
this
just
goes,
know that it's a scary emotion for
it's
me,
scary. Yeah.
if for anybody, right? But when you get, sometimes when you confront it, or when you try to understand it, and then it becomes a. But yeah, it's totally, and even, sometimes, not always in those ensemble efforts, though. I will say that anger's not a good thing when you've got a group of artists working together. We've all been there. That's
Yep.
an easy, and it's the American tale of how many bands have broken up. I'm getting out of the bloody band, you bloody wanker. And it's, what happened? Anger killed the band.
So it goes along with this. You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, but one creates what one resists. Bob Goldthwait morphed it into you are what you hate. And James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So just your thoughts off the top of your head on this idea, not you, Jerry, but one creates what one resists. You create what you resist. Any thoughts on that idea?
Oh yeah, I think you know what's the old phrase? We're our own worst editor. You know, I'm like that. I definitely am what often create what I resist. And sometimes it's a contrivance. Sometimes it's a contrivance to get me off of, because I'm also, like many writers I know, well, half and half, I guess it goes. I haven't taken a poll, but I'm a classic procrastinator, right?
Yeah.
And so some of this can feed that. But so I can create, so I can overthink something, and I can
Yeah.
and I can create enemies, contrived enemies in my head, which are usually me, right? And the thing that might upset me about something else or someone else is the thing that upsets me about me, right? I mean, it's the oldest, not the oldest, but certainly anybody who's talked to a counselor or anything like that, you're going to get that at some point.
Yeah.
But for sure, you can create that. I
Yeah.
I feel like I've done a good job of it at times.
Yep. Like you point at someone, you're stingy, and the finger is pointing at yourself, and you're stingy, but Jerry, I asked for 90 minutes. It's already 90 minutes. How can you go a few more minutes
Sure.
over?
Oh, yeah. I'm totally, man. I'm
Okay.
enjoying
Let's
talking.
yeah, this is beautiful. Let's go another 10 or 15. How do you find peace of mind?
Ah, that is the, peace of mind for me, Jerry, is like Ponce de Leon looking for the fountain of youth. Not,
Yeah.
and it's not getting younger. It's just it's an elusive thing for me. Peace of mind. One way I find peace of mind is completing something, a
Yeah.
project. That's a great feeling. It really is. It's a small thing, but that's a small piece of mind. There's those moments I alluded to much earlier, and it won't be a quiz from you or me because I'll butcher trying to rephrase it. But that idea of reaching that place that's neither happy nor sad, and just
Yeah.
that's a peace of mind thing. You could get that peace of mind. Like, I mean, I reached it at that moment when I was listening to Jimmy Herring and John McLaughlin. I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I'm the most, again, for a guy who wrote a book on a musician, I haven't been to the most concerts in the world, but I've been to enough of them to have
Yeah.
experienced those moments of bliss in the face of what artists are doing, and then also moments of boredom and moments of tedium, or moments of, wow, this is great, different areas of your being. But that's certainly that place of, yeah, you've reached it, and it doesn't matter how happy or sad I am. This is a moment I need to be in, and it's, they don't happen that often, otherwise they wouldn't be so special.
Yeah, it's back to when McLuhan said the gap is where the action is. He also was referring to what's called suspended judgment. We feel we have to make an aesthetic. I like this or I dislike. He said, you're going to be able to really get the big picture if you don't take a point of view. Now, naturally, you can, but when you're with one or more people, if you don't take a point of view and say, I hate Facebook or I love Facebook, look at it, it's a Facebook world. See
Right,
how it's shaping your behavior. You can
right.
have the person. So these are 5 quick Alan Watts questions off the top of your head, just like words. Who started it all?
I lost you
Who
for a second.
started? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. The first question, just in a couple words. First question is, who started it all?
Abner Doubleday.
Nice. Are we going to make it?
Not if the current, not at the current rate.
Where do we put it?
Under the couch cushions.
I like that. Who's cleaning it up?
The last person to find it.
Is it serious?
Only if you laugh at it.
Oh, that is beautiful. You did that better than most. And I love the couch cushions. It's one of my favorite things to do is dig into your couch and find all the rare little things.
Yeah, really. There's that pen I've been missing. I love this pen.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Oh, yeah. To my 12-year-old self, I would say, shift to pitching.
Very good.
I was great arm. I just had a weak bat.
Well, we got to divert for 1 second. Your 3 top baseball players of all time.
Ooh, well, Willie Mays for sure. Willie Mays.
Dude, we're there, man. Same name, same baseball hero.
Oh yeah, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron. The third guy, that's the tough one there. I have to say the guy I'm writing about, Johnny Mize. I got to give a plug to the book, Johnny Mize.
That is so cool. Should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Oh, over.
Why?
Well, because that's the side that gets printed on.
Here's a good one for you. If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Ooh, Shiftless.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
Oh, ditto smell.
Oh, ditto. That's mimeograph ink.
Yeah, remember those blue mimeographs?
Oh my God, that is great. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Oh, cool. I'd want it to be made of discarded Bic pens. And it should be displayed in front of the now closed museum in Washington, D.C.
Yes. That Bic pen thing will never go out of my mind. That is amazing. Jerry, tell me something good you never had, but you never want. It's good, you never had it, but you never want it.
Could that include a trip? I would say
Yeah.
I would say a trip to Antarctica.
Yeah, it's good. You never had it, never want it. Good.
I mean, there's a part of me that really digs like, in other words, if for some godforsaken reason the higher ups at Georgia Tech said, Jerry, we need you to go to one of our research crews to Antarctica, I would totally go, and I'd write and it would be a great challenge, but I don't necessarily want to go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's not something I'm going to pitch to an editor for a freelance gig. Let's put it that way.
Dude, just watch. Werner Herzog has a great documentary about it. In Henry Kaiser and Richard Thompson did the soundtrack. It's amazing soundtrack.
Cool. I might have seen. Oh,
Yeah.
I love her. He's been doing he does great documentaries.
He's got a great doc.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple more and we're out of here. What a fun time, dude. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I'd probably, before it hit me in the face, I'd say, have you ever seen The Magic Christian? But I'd try to turn my head.
That is good. I've asked Terry Southern's son, Niall, all these questions.
Oh, really?
Yeah, his dad wrote that. He'll love to hear that. That's
great. I love that movie. I would have to say that while turning my head because I don't want it to hit me full foul.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Well, the cultural shift that I detect, and maybe this is a function of working at the university, is there really is a sense young people of being, responsible, sort of. Besides being smarter, I think, than I do believe that in many ways generations get smarter in some ways. And I feel like they're using their smarts, they're using the educations that they get, whatever, on the streets to do better things. I feel I feel encouragement over the advocacy and the activity of a lot of young people. I really do. I have to say that gives me some hope. Certainly, there are times when I fall into the old man thing, damn it, in my day. But for the most part, I'm impressed and encouraged.
Yeah,
at the openness that there's an openness that didn't used to exist, and when I was, and maybe I'm living in a bubble too. Maybe part of it is living in a bubble. I'll own that if that's the case. But it just feels that way.
I get that a lot. You're not. That's like 90% of people answer that question just that way. So I'm going to add a bonus question because I'm so impressed. How many years you been with your wife?
We've been together 41 years, and we've been married 30. How long? 37 years, I think. Something like that.
How do you explain the longevity?
Honest to God, the truth is we are stubborn as hell.
Well, how would that would seem you would clash more, but how does this
part of the stubbornness is that, in those bad moments, I ain't gonna give up. Well, I ain't gonna give up either, that kind of thing. And so that ultimately brings us together. If we're not going to give up, what do we? So it's been like every other marriage you've ever heard about, I guess, or been in. It's got its ups and downs. It's a roller coaster. It's totally a roller coaster. It's not like that movie Parenthood. I know sometimes it gets panned, but it was Ron Howard and Steve Martin was in it. But there's a beauty to that movie, that there's the old woman who talks about the difference between the merry-go-round and the roller coaster. And at her age, she's near the end, she prefers the roller coaster. And that's what she's talking about. And, having been living on a roller coaster, partly, of course, the typical marriage thing, partly disability, that takes you through all kinds of crazy ups and downs and ins and outs and emotions. And so I think it's a commitment. It's just stubbornness is the jokey answer, but there's a truth to that as well. It's like, Well, our first date, this is why we refused to give up on each other, Jerry. Our first date was the Simon and Garfunkel reunion concert in Central Park in 1981. It was 500,000 people there. It was a total accident that we would be dating, and so it's all been, so that gave us something to aspire to. In other words, we'll never reach that, but we can keep trying.
Yeah, beautiful. That is really beautiful. So Thornton Wilder, great playwright, wrote on the town. He said, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret; it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time." Jerry, you've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Well, I don't want to be too simplistic, but if I strip everything away and get to the bottom line of it, it's the only thing I know how to do. What I'm doing with my life is the only thing I know how to do. Whether we're talking work or family or citizenship, I do the best I can in that moment, and that's not always the best I can do. But then there are other times I'll do better than I can do. That happens. That happens.
That happens. I love that you said it ain't going to stop me from trying, because they asked Sidney Lumet, who's a socially aware filmmaker, they said, "Can films do anything?" He says, "No, but it ain't going to keep me from trying."
That's right.
That's right. A beautiful attitude. Yeah.
It's a journey, man. I feel like you got to have something to look forward to. If you don't, it's like, it goes back to being the student all your life kind of philosophy. Yeah. It's like you want to keep digging. I feel like when you stop is when you sort of given up. It's not a judgment on that. Some people know when they want to give up, but that's just the way I feel about that. And I've known, it's funny, a couple of friends who've died, who I remember having to write their memorials or their obituaries, and one of the things that they insisted be in it was that concept of, I was a student all my life, and I thought that was cool.
Yeah. Well, that's James Joyce Finnegan's Wake, is you fall down, then you get back up. You fall down and get back up. That's the human condition. Yeah. So it's hard, to have that courage, that risk, and that, perseverance. Yeah. So the last question, really been fun, Jerry, truly enlightening. What gives you the most optimism?
What gives me the most optimism is it's a person, and it's my daughter, my oldest child. We have 2 children, and my daughter's 35. She lives in Michigan, but being around her, talking with her, sucking her energy, as old people tend to do to the young, that gives me a lot of optimism, because she's brilliant. She's just, even though she's hundreds of miles away from me now, she's always been a presence in my life. We've been through the forest together, so we've come out the other side, and that's a sense of optimism there. So that's
touching.
It's powerful.
Really touching. Yeah, I'm a Michigander too. I've been in Venice 43 years, but I love Michigan. What city she's in Michigan?
This is so funny. She literally just moved from Holland, Michigan, up to Kingsley, upstate.
Yeah.
And so they got this old house. They've got this beautiful, like, 100-year-old house that is mostly refurbished. They've got these outbuildings, and so they're going to have some fun when there's 4 acres in the country. They both work from home. They're both in the in a technology sort of industry, all over my head. But I mean, she's such a creative person, and a giving person that, and again, she gives me optimism. She gives me optimism because, she's younger, and she's close. Yeah. I don't know.
I get it from you, is that your parents raised you with that sense that family's important.
They really did. I will say that that's a huge thing for me. but also, friendship is. I
Yeah.
think the human. I think, as humans, we're better together than we are apart. And I certainly like my solitude. I live in the country, but I like my people. I'm a humanist, I think, at heart. If there was a
Yeah.
religion, if I guess, but I feel like I have a lot of optimism generally, even though I often go down a pessimistic road inwardly.
Yeah.
When I have to overcome that, to get to the place that I feel is, you get to that optimistic place, and it becomes that place that's beyond optimism, and it is what it is, and what it's
Yeah.
meant to be.
Be here now. So yeah, talking
Here
about
now,
friends,
nature.
I think it's Jez Graham who introduced us, but
Yes,
but it should have been Colonel Bruce, because I did 2 interviews with Colonel Bruce for Flipside magazine.
you did.
Yeah,
Wow.
and I was like, I should have got those to you while you were writing your book, but they're
Yes,
all.
I was looking for so much material, Jerry. I
Well,
was searching. I mean, I was beating the bushes for material, and certainly found a lot. I'm sending you this. I'm so sorry I didn't.
oh,
I
don't
thought.
worry. I look forward to it, but it's funny
Yes.
because the beauty is a lot of day Bruce over 2 interviews, and they weren't good sit down situations. They were like backstage or whatever. And I don't even remember. I mean, I think both of them were published in Flipside, and I hope the audios are in my archive. But somewhere down the line, I got to get them to you, just because
Yes.
you covered the waterfront on them.
I
And
would love.
I do want to encourage listeners. There's a lot of great YouTube videos where you talk about Colonel Bruce. Encourage people to get your book. And then there's one interview with you that tells people to go to this other interview with Bruce that was just amazing.
Oh yeah, the one with I think Jeff Mosier. I think.
Yeah. Oh,
It's
I've asked Jeff Mosier all these questions also.
that's great.
The
Jeff is.
same questions.
Oh, that's awesome. Jeff is such a great guy.
He
Jeff
is
is the reason
amazing.
he's why I met Bruce is through Jeff. Because he was just such a sweet guy. He'd come up here and play in our little mountain town. And then we had this music festival, a little music festival. He says, I could get Bruce Hampton. And we were all like, hell yeah. And because we all knew of Bruce. And I had never met him all these years. I was 50 or 45 when I met Bruce. I was already, well into my life when I met and got hip to Bruce. And so we connected over trivia and baseball.
Yeah, I know. I heard.
Oh, you saw that. You saw the videos.
And
But
the beauty also is the dude deserved a book, and he deserved a good documentary, and he got both.
he did. He really did. I'm so glad, because I love the documentary, and there's a whole chapter on the documentary in the book, so you'll enjoy that, I think.
Yeah.
And there's a chapter about Sling Blade, because he was in Sling, so I did a chapter on what that was like to make that movie with him.
Yeah, that was super cool. Jerry, it's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. Even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Thank you. See ya.